Welcome to a presentation by Stratify. Note, all opinions and copyright belong to Stratify 2025. Any likeness to other works is purely coincidental. All rights reserved. Part 0. Spending money. This presentation is the longest in this series and covers important foundational aspects of what actually happens when we spend money. It is not intended to replace the masses of in-depth literature on this subject, but is intended instead to provide a high-level reference. The contents are universal and apply to individuals as equally as to organizations, such as national government, businesses, schools, and charities. Harry Beck produced the London Tube map. The information presented only what a traveller needed to know to plan routes without any extraneous details. Whilst the Beck geometrical representation is not simple, it removed unnecessary data and simplified the remaining. Similarly, the objective here is to uncomplicate a financial transaction and describe the underlying principles that impact everyone multiple times, everywhere, every day. These principles allow us to see the interrelationships that can be used to critique purchases quickly. Any sovereign nation has two financial paths available to optimize. Described here as a conventional transaction meaning any normal purchase, or an unconventional transaction, referring to a central bank intervention. Either the fundamentals need to be correct or the budget will imbalance and force central bank printing or quantitative easing with its associated inflation. This document series describes conventional transactions only. If you get these correct, then borrowing or quantitative easing can be reduced. In the predominantly Christian West, we often hear some derivative of, money is the root of all evil. Unfortunately, the concept, if you eliminate money, you will eliminate the world's ills, is not accurate. At a simple level, money is merely the means to exchange. Rather like oil between machine cogs. An interim medium between two assets, implying that a return to bartering, dearly loved by anarchists as an option, won't work except in a limited local way. A suggestion is, we have a better system than we realize and we don't use it correctly. If we take time to reverse engineer a financial transaction, we can describe it like this. Price equals cost plus margin, where price is what we pay, and margin is some compromise of what will the market let us charge? How much do we want or need per unit or transaction sale? Do we have a strategy to increase sales or market share? Do we include a state subsidy to enable an increased share of international markets? And what is the profit target? The cost component is split into two: direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs includes the cost of raw materials, energy for both value add and transportation, and finally, staffing and resource costs. Similarly, the indirect costs are also further split into two. These are overhead costs and offset costs. Overhead costs includes admin staff, plant overheads, and depreciation. Offset costs are the net change of product and packaging material at end of life, waste process material including gases, net impact to environment and life, both direct and indirect. Another way to consider this is, offset costs are the changes made as a result of the purchase that will not normally be accounted for. This offset cost will cover the destructive side of capitalism, one that motivates many anti-capitalists. This is because offset costs are the component that invokes the emotional response due to the impact on environment or life. We can now combine the equations 1, 2, and 3 to generate equation 4. Price paid equals direct costs plus overhead costs plus offset costs plus margin. This describes every transaction without exception. As a contrarian discussion, what about perks, free items, or even stolen items? There is no such thing as free. If you haven't paid because something is a gift free or stolen, then someone else has. We can modify equation 4 by simply replacing price with consumption. A note regarding theft: assuming the original purchaser wants to replace the stolen item. This will mean all of the downsides of the original purchase have to be repeated, with the lost effort, lost time for replacement, perhaps loss of value-add production caused by the theft, and finally, a duplicate of all of the initial offset costs. Concern over environment damage or waste is covered by offset costs. Many people and organizations desire to bib green conclude that some offset costs are unacceptable. A minority arrive at a conclusion of disliking effects of capitalism and reject equation 4 completely. A further small minority of these conclude eliminating humans eliminate the problem and need for solution. As we can see from equation 4, there is a truth in this crass nihilistic point of view. The reduction in consumption has the direct effect of reducing transactions and nullifies all costs, except where investment has already occurred. A recent example of this is the German Green Party cancelling and decommissioning the state nuclear power plants decades before their intended end of life. The rational result here is the total useful output produced over the lifetime was reduced. Or, the effective price per kilowatt-hour dramatically increased because cost components were spread across less output. Many transactions purposing to be benevolent often only reduce the margin value. All other costs remain present. E.g., charity is a business that gives away a profit or service, but one that should not operate at a loss overall. If consumption still occurs, replacing price with any bartering system will include all of the components including offset costs. Thus, no environmental benefit occurs with bartering, only helps with limiting visibility of taxation on a transaction. A large transaction on green infrastructure projects, for example a wind turbine investment. This would include manufacture, installation, commissioning and continuous ongoing maintenance. In all of the above categories, offset costs will be evident and different. Translates as, if any entity is spending money, offset costs are incurred. The useful lifetime must include disposal in the cost-benefit analysis to justify the permanent offset damage costs. When a government announces a spending plan to fix an environmental problem, we now know the new offset costs incurred by the total amount spent minus any improvement achieved is correct way to view this scenario. Returning to the wind power example. This becomes more complicated when conventional grid supply is flexibly used for backup, but the investment capability has to be fully functional and installed but is not predictably utilized. A conclusion to this point is, in any political program, the headline and stated costs are nearly always oversimplified, never transparent or include all costs. This naturally leads to a perpetually disappointed public from state projects as overpromise and underdeliver at overcost. Traditional media in the UK often simplifies cheaper imported goods because of lower local wages. Whilst this is undoubtedly true, and in the case of China the use of slave labor is an extreme example of this, it is not the complete argument. Goods are cheaper because of a combination of cheaper direct costs in the form of raw materials, energy, both direct and transportation, employee staffing costs. Also, lower overhead costs from administration staff, plant costs, plant depreciation, and health and safety legislation. The costs of managing offset costs will be lower, mainly because environmental regulation and limitations to environmental damage is lower, resulting in lower financial costs but greater offset costs. These might include material, product and packaging at end of life, material during process, legislation on waste and any overall state and location change to plant, materials and energy used. An example is CO2 produced during energy conversion is regulated in the UK but not in China. This produces an absurdity when UK tax on Chinese imports is less than Chinese tax on UK imports into China. Other considerations include high volume with lower unit profits sometimes to obtain a higher market share. Also, sales and corporation taxes will differ. Some of the taxes raised on particular cost and profit components of the price are as follows. Note: this is not an exhaustive list. Traditional media often simplifies corporation tax as some sort of indicative of total tax paid by that company if it registers a head office in the UK. This makes no sense, as if franchising and import cost structures can offshore into a more tax-efficient domicile. Then that location will be where the head office is based and corporation tax paid. The attraction to markets is ease of potential sales and profit. A suggestion would be national percentage of global market taxed as profit prior to any reinvestment. This could be made applicable, for example, to US tech giants. All of the elements need to be considered. What attracts marketers to markets is potential sales, margins, and thus profits. To summarize, capitalism works best when offset against people or the environment. This means, if you spend money or you consume, you are causing both environmental damage and direct and collateral damage to people. The amount of damage is not only product-specific, but also region-specific due to differences between legislation of nations. This includes spending on behalf of a third party for third-party consumption. Obligations go beyond personal expenditure, i.e., if you spend money on behalf of another, same stipulation applies, including charities and government expenditure. From the same logic, we can see that goods produced overseas are not cheaper simply because wages are cheaper and that corporation tax only determines profit location. capitalism might be the best process and system possible. The caveat is, if capitalism is understood and optimized by government administration and intelligently configured to operate within guide rails and national boundaries. Thank you for your attention. If you wish to use any content, prior agreement should be sought. Where definitions, wording, or content are suboptimal or incorrect, please feel free to provide feedback via the contact details provided.